Well, you could call it economic shock. It turns out the first quarter was a lot worse than anybody imagined. The GDP suffering the worst downturn outside of a recession in more than 50 years. Now, the White House and other Democrats blaming it largely on bad weather, but some here are saying they should get a mirror. Hi, everybody. I'm David Asman. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus with Sabrina Schaefer, Mike Ozanian, John Tamny, Bill Baldwin, Rick Unger, and Bruce Jabson. So, John, what is holding the economy back, the weather or the government?
Well, the good news and the bad news is that economic growth is truly easy, and it's a function of government just getting out of the way. So it is government policies. If you made me dictator, I would zero out the capital gains tax. There are no companies and no jobs without investment first. Stop penalizing it. I'd cut the corporate tax. There's no reason that we should rob corporations of their successful future. I'd free up trade. That's how we are able to specialize in the work we do best. And I would tie the dollar to gold. Good money is the path to major investment and trade, and that's the path to prosperity.
Well, Rick Unger, look at all the capital in this country that is frozen. I mean, this country relies on capital to get things started. All this money, this cash is sitting on the sidelines. Corporations, $1.5 trillion. Banks, $2.5 trillion. Private equity funds, $1.1 trillion. They're not investing the capital. How do you get that capital working?
Well, look, here's what I'm prepared to say about it. It's going to surprise both some of you and our viewers. We have to leave the politics out of this at this point. Whatever we've been doing, we have to say it ain't working, which means we have to try something else. Now, I'm not convinced as to what that something else should be. I know that the first thought's always going to be tax cuts. From my research, it's never really worked before, but that doesn't mean that it won't work this time. Everyone is different. So what I do like in what John said, although I don't think I'm prepared for him to be the dictator, I think maybe the place to start is with the corporate tax cuts and to see if that actually stimulates things.
All right. Well, the dictators, by the way, are usually the ones who get it wrong. The people are the ones who get it right. And Mike Ozanian, just when all of the so-called experts, the IMF and everything, said that the first quarter was going to be great, 74% of Americans said they felt that they were still in a recession. They got it right. The Americans got it right. The experts got it wrong.
That's right, David. And a lot of those people are small business owners, which is why they get it right. I'd go for a different type of tax cut. I'd go for a reduction in government spending. That worked very well for Bill Clinton. It left more capital for the private sector. It also does something that John Tamny would love. It strengthens the dollar, which really helps investment in this country and will get some of that money moving out of the banks and into the economy.
And Bruce, if companies do not invest, they don't grow. If they don't grow, they don't hire people. So how do you get them to invest all that capital that they have?
Well, I would say borrow a chapter from the legendary Iowa football coach Hayden Fry, who used to say, scratch where it itches. So in healthcare, healthcare is growing, right? Healthcare is an area that continues to grow, and why don't we embrace Obamacare? You have all this money coming toward it anyway.
Actually, healthcare didn't grow
and it's hiring people, and people are spending money, and hospitals that have stashed a lot of cash are starting to spend a lot of money. And it's an area where the economy is growing, so we could focus on healthcare.
By the way, as Rick Unger correctly points out, that was one of the problems in the first quarter. People were not spending on healthcare. Of course, during recessions and bad times, a lot of people cut back on their healthcare spending. But Sabrina, let me focus on one thing in particular. It was mentioned before, the corporate tax rate in America is the highest in the world. It is also one of the most complicated in the world. While we top out at 40%, a lot of companies only pay about, the big corporations, because they have all the lawyers, pay about 20% because they get all these deductions and everything. But it's so high, it's so complex. Shouldn't we start there?
That's exactly what I think. I think this is all about simplifying the tax system. We know that we have a few major problems, right? Our marginal tax rate and our corporate tax rate are both too high. We know that it's too complicated of a system for both individuals and businesses. And all of this allows for more corruption at the IRS, as we've seen this year. You can get rid of all of these problems and spur economic growth simply by simplifying, streamlining the tax system.
Well, Bill Baldwin, how about doing it for the whole nation? I mean, not just for the corporations, but for everybody.
I'd love to see simpler taxes, but I got a different thought I'd like to present here, which is I'd like to make it a lot easier for companies to add employment, to add workers. What if we had a duty-free zone for new employment? If you go from 1,000 employees to 1,050, you can take on 50 freelancers. And what does that mean to be a freelancer? It means that the worker is responsible for his own payroll taxes, and it means that the employer is not subject to this morass of regulations plus payroll taxes plus Obamacare plus all these lawsuits if they don't do it right. They could do anything they wanted. And then after about 2 years, I'd give them a deadline. They'd have to make honest employees out of those new workers. And that experiment might allow them to bring on some new talent and say, you know what, we're doing better.
Mike Hosseinian, what do you think?
I think Sabrina's way is much simpler, Bill. Look, the corporate tax really is just a pass-through tax, right? Corporations pay that off by either increasing prices on what they sell or paying their workers less. Get rid of the corporate tax. It's a phony pass-through tax that hits consumers and workers, and you get to solving what Bill is trying to do in a much better way.
Well, and Rick Unger, I have heard Democrats come out and say that the corporate tax is too high. It should be simplified. We should get rid of the deductions, have a flatter rate. What do you think about that?
I certainly think that that would be, if we're going to get serious about tax cuts at this point, because the other way isn't working, that's the place to start. I do want to add something, though, about the health care part of this, because I thought it was fascinating. You know, it's sometimes hard to find something good in such bad news, and these numbers were bad news. But there was a substantially lower rate of spending in health care than what had been anticipated, which accounted for 66% of the drop. That might, in fact, be very good news. Here's the problem. It does beg the question, if people didn't spend the money on health care, maybe a good thing, why didn't they take that money and spend it somewhere else?
Right. Well, and again, people tend to hold on to what they have in bad economic times. John Tamny, I want to ask about the duty-free zone, Bill Baldwin's idea of that. What do you think of that idea?
I think that we should be a nationwide duty-free zone. Lest we forget, when you look at Hong Kong, everything is duty-free, and the result is free trade countries are very prosperous countries because you get to do what you're best at and trade your wares with others around the world who are doing what they're best at. So anytime you opened up our markets, you would greatly enhance prosperity, and it would be very quick.
Bruce, I've always thought it was kind of simple because you look around at what works and what doesn't work, and you copy the policies that work, and you get rid of the policies that don't work. When you look at Hong Kong, the growth that they had, particularly before they became a part of communist China, I mean, it was through the roof. Shouldn't we model ourselves after what works?
Well, I think that certainly you have a great point there, but one of the big issues on changing the tax code and whatever is, how are you going to do it? I mean, Congress, these people couldn't put together a two-car funeral, and perhaps if the Senate changes next year, we could do something. But you talk to these members of Congress, and they're all like, "Oh, well, we can't do anything because of this party or that party." And all of these, some of these are really good ideas, but how are you going to get it done? That's the problem. So we have to go
you know, it is very frustrating, Sabrina, when you look at what those idiots inside the Beltway can manage to screw up, even when they agree on something. I mean, that Simpson-Bowles thing, where they just decided to get rid of the deductions, lower the rates. Democrats, Republicans agreed. It never got done. When are they ever going to do something that works?
Right. I mean, I agree with Bruce that it is very complicated. There's a lot of special interests, and there's a lot of people on the Hill who are going to be reluctant to take that step. And I think that sort of puts into sharp relief why it can't simply be tax cuts and the tax system that we're focused on. It's the regulatory side also that we have to pay attention to. It would be great to have all of these tax cuts that I'm advocating for, but at the same time, I want to see Washington get out of the workplace altogether. Stop mandating new benefits. Stop changing the wage structure. Stop expanding, you know, medical and family leave. All of this is really burdensome on businesses, small and large, and so we have to have both sides of this operation.
Well, you know, one of the biggest contradictions in the world, in the entire world, and probably the entire universe, is the fact that John Tamny, who hates government so much, lives in Washington, D.C. and has the Capitol Dome right behind his head right now. John, is there any hope that democracy, that Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals working together will get the job done at some point?
I'm the mole inside this awful place. In terms of them getting something done, color me skeptical, because for Congress to do this, for it to flatten taxes, is for Congress to give away enormous amounts of power. They like taxes to be high so they can give out favors in terms of deductions. The problem isn't the incentives driving politicians.
All right, first and last word from John Tamny coming up.